Prologue. Background and context. Long before Rome built its legions, long before Alexander the Great crossed into Asia, long before Egypt reached the height of its power, one man did something that no ruler in recorded history had done before. He looked at a world of divided, warring city-states and decided that all of it should belong to him, not through alliance, not through marriage, through conquest, and then through something more lasting than conquest, organization. His name was Sargon of Akkad, and what he built was the world's first empire. Key parties: Sargon of Akkad, circa 2334 to 2279 BCE, founder of the Akkadian Empire, military genius, and arguably the most consequential ruler of the ancient world. The Sumerian city-states, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, Umma. The existing powers Sargon absorbed into his empire. Lugal-Zagezi of Uruk, the Sumerian king who had briefly united several city-states before Sargon defeated and humiliated him. Akkadian governors and administrators, the loyal officials Sargon placed in conquered cities to enforce central authority. Rimush and Manishtushu, Sargon's sons and successors who spent much of their reigns suppressing revolts. Naram-Sin, circa 2254 to 2218 BCE, Sargon's grandson, the empire's most powerful ruler after its founder, declared himself a god. The Gutians, a mountain people from the Zagros range whose raids helped bring the empire down. Historical setting: Mesopotamia, circa 2350 BCE. The Sumerian city-states have been warring with one another for centuries. The most recent dominant power is Lugal-Zagezi of Umma, who has conquered most of Sumer and briefly united it under his rule, the closest anyone has come to regional dominance before Sargon. Sargon likely begins as a cupbearer, a senior official, not a lowly servant, to the king of Kish, a position of real influence. He seizes power, defeats Lugal-Zagezi, and begins a campaign of expansion that will last for decades. His capital, Akkad, has never been archaeologically located, one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. The Akkadian language is Semitic, related to later languages such as Babylonian, Assyrian, Arabic, and Hebrew. Its rise through Sargon's empire marks the beginning of Semitic cultural dominance in Mesopotamia, a shift that would shape the region for millennia. Long before Rome built its legions, long before Alexander the Great crossed into Asia, before Egypt reached the summit of its power, one man looked at a world of divided, warring cities and decided that all of it should belong to him, not through diplomacy, not through marriage or alliance, through conquest, and something far more lasting than conquest, through empire. Act 1, the world Sargon was born into. In the lands of Mesopotamia, the great river valley of the Tigris and Euphrates, a world of extraordinary cities had grown up over thousands of years. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, Umma. Each was a civilization unto itself. Each had its own king, its own temples, its own proud traditions, and each was in near constant conflict with the others. For centuries, no single city could dominate the rest for long. One would rise, another would strike back. Power shifted endlessly, like water finding its own level. This endless cycle produced strong warriors, but it also produced a world fragmented by rivalry, exhausted by war, and incapable of lasting unity. It was into this world that Sargon was born. We do not know his birth name. Sargon, Sharukenu in his own language, means the true king. It was a title he gave himself, a declaration of intent as much as a name. Legend says he was born in secret, placed in a basket by his mother, set upon the river, and rescued by a gardener who raised him as her own. The story bears a striking resemblance to the later story of Moses, and it was almost certainly mythological, a tale constructed to give a self-made man a suitably dramatic origin. What we know with more confidence is that Sargon rose through the ranks of Kish, one of Sumer's great cities, and became a man of power and ambition in a world that was about to be remade. Act 2. The Conquest of Sumer. Before Sargon made his move, one Sumerian king had come closer than any other to uniting the region. His name was Lugal-Zaggisi of Umma. He had conquered city after city, proclaimed himself Lord of Sumer, and boasted in his inscriptions that his kingdom stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. It was a bold claim. Whether it was entirely true is another matter. Sargon did not wait to find out. He struck Lugal-Zaggisi directly and defeated him. According to Sargon's own inscriptions, he paraded Lugal-Zaggisi to the temple of Enlil, the chief god of the Sumerian world, in a neckstock. A public humiliation designed to send a message to every king in the region. The old order was finished. One by one the Sumerian city-states fell. Uruk fell. Ur fell. Lagash fell. Kish, the very city where Sargon had once served, fell. But what made Sargon truly different from every conqueror before him was not the scale of his victories. It was what he did with them. He did not raze the cities. He did not massacre the populations. He kept the cities intact, and then he ruled them. Act 3. The architecture of the First Empire, what Sargon built, was something genuinely new in the history of the world. Previous rulers had conquered neighbors. Previous rulers had demanded tribute, but Sargon created a system, a structure of governance designed to hold together a vast multi-ethnic territory with permanent authority. He replaced local Sumerian rulers with Akkadian governors, men personally loyal to him, accountable to his court, answerable to his laws. He standardized weights and measures across his empire so that trade and taxation worked by the same rules from the Persian Gulf to the mountains of the north. He built roads, or at least maintained routes, to move armies and messages quickly. He established a messenger system that kept the capital informed of events in distant provinces. And at the center of all of this sat his capital, the city of Akkad. Akkad has never been found. Despite decades of searching, archaeologists have not identified its location with certainty, but ancient texts describe it as a magnificent city, wealthy, cosmopolitan, crowded with merchants from every corner of the known world. Ships unloaded their cargoes at its wharves. Scribes copied texts in multiple languages. The wealth of an empire flowed through its markets. Sargon was not modest about what he had achieved. His inscriptions proclaimed him king of the four corners of the world, meaning simply king of everything. And by the standards of the world he knew he was not wrong. Act 4. Rebellion and the cost of empire. But ruling an empire, Sargon discovered, was far harder than winning one. The Sumerian cities had been independent for thousands of years. Their people remembered their own kings. Their priesthoods resented foreign governors. Their merchants chafed under standardized rules that benefited Akkad at their expense. Rebellions began almost immediately. Ancient texts record that Sargon had to fight 34 battles in a single year to hold his empire together. 34 battles in a year. No rest, no consolidation, just constant war. He crushed each revolt in turn. He was ruthless when he needed to be, destroying walls, punishing rebel leaders, installing new governors more loyal than the last. But suppression alone cannot hold an empire together. Sargon understood this. He made deliberate efforts to integrate Akkadian and Sumerian culture, appointing his daughter, Enheduanna, as high priestess of the moon god Nana at Ur. In doing so, he placed someone of his own blood at the heart of Sumerian religious life. Enheduanna, the same woman we met in episode 1 as the world's first named author, was not only a poet, she was a political instrument of the highest order. Through her sacred role, she linked Akkadian royal power to the deepest roots of Sumerian spiritual life. It was, by any measure, a masterstroke of imperial governance. His successors, his sons Rimush and Manishtushu, were less fortunate. Both faced massive rebellions. Both crushed them. Both were eventually assassinated, possibly by members of their own courts. The empire held, but it held the way a clenched fist holds water, with great force and at constant cost. Act 5. The grandson who called himself a god. The Akkadian Empire reached its greatest power not under Sargon himself, but under his grandson. His name was Naram-Sin, and he was extraordinary, and in the end, catastrophic. Naram-Sin expanded the empire further than Sargon had, pushing north into Anatolia and east into the Zagros Mountains. He was a brilliant military commander. His famous Victory Stele, now in the Louvre in Paris, shows him ascending a mountain over the bodies of his enemies, a horned helmet on his head. The horns were the mark of divinity. Because Naram-Sin did something no Mesopotamian ruler had done before, he declared himself a god, not a favorite of the gods, not appointed by the gods, a god, a living deity, divine in his own person. He added a divine symbol, a star, before his name in official inscriptions. He demanded worship alongside the traditional Mesopotamian deities. Some scholars believe this was a calculated political move, a way to transcend the ethnic and cultural divisions of the empire by placing himself above all of them, belonging to no single people but sacred to all. Whether it was brilliant politics or dangerous hubris, later Mesopotamian tradition would remember Naram-Sin as a man who overreached, whose pride offended the gods, and whose reign ended in catastrophe. Act 6. The Fall. Climate, War, and Collapse. In the decades after Naram-Sin, the Akkadian Empire began to come apart. The causes were multiple, and some of them could not be fought with an army. Around 2200 BCE, a prolonged drought struck the Near East. Modern climate studies, including analysis of ancient soil cores and lake sediments, suggest that rainfall in the region collapsed dramatically over several generations. Crops failed. Populations moved. Cities that had fed thousands could no longer do so. One ancient text, known as the Curse of Akkad, describes a collapse so severe that cities were abandoned, trade ceased, and the land fell silent. Whether this is history or myth or both, it captures something real about what happened. From the Zagros Mountains to the east and north, a people known as the Gutians began to raid the empire's heartland. They were not conquering. They were opportunistic, striking at a system too weakened to defend itself. The last Akkadian king, Shar-Kali-Shari, managed to hold the center together for a time. But after his death, the records simply say who was king, who was not king. An empire that had ruled the world had become a question mark. The Akkadian Empire fell around 2154 BCE, roughly a century and a half after Sargon had built it. Closing. The legacy of Sargon. The Akkadian Empire lasted less than 200 years. By the timescales of later empires, Rome, which lasted 800 years in the West alone, that might seem brief. But what Sargon left behind was not a dynasty, it was an idea. The idea that many cities, many peoples, and many cultures could be governed as one by a central authority, with standardized rules, administered by loyal officials answerable to a single ruler. Every empire that followed learned from Akkad. Babylon inherited its administrative structures. Assyria modeled its imperial propaganda on Akkadian precedents. Persia refined the system of governors, called satraps, that Sargon had pioneered. Rome brought it to its fullest expression. Even today, when we talk about centralized government, about the reach of national authority into local affairs, about the relationship between a capital and its provinces, we are still grappling with the problems that Sargon first confronted 4,000 years ago. He did not solve them. No one ever fully has. But Sargon of Akkad was the first to ask the question. One king, one law, many nations. The idea of empire was born here, and the world has never been the same since. Epilogue. Historical accuracy notes. Sargon's dates, circa 2334 to 2279 BCE, follow the conventional middle chronology. Some scholars prefer slightly different dates. All place him in the late 24th century BCE. The 34 battles figure comes from Sargon's own inscriptions, preserved in later copies. Ancient royal inscriptions are often exaggerated, but the number reflects the genuine frequency of rebellion he faced. The victory stele of Naram Sin is held in the Louvre, Paris, SB4. It is one of the most celebrated objects from the ancient world. The 4.2 kiloyear event, the climate crisis around 2200 BCE, is a real and well-documented climatic episode now supported by extensive paleoclimate data. It is associated with the collapse of several contemporary civilizations, including the Akkadian Empire and the Egyptian Old Kingdom. Who was king? Who was not king? Is a genuine quotation from the Sumerian king list, referring to the period after the Akkadian Empire's fall. It is one of the most poignant phrases in ancient historiography. Sources and further reading. The Ancient Near East, A History, by William W. Hello and William Kelly Simpson. Empires of the Monsoon, for broader context of ancient trade. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, CDLI, for Sargon's own inscriptions and translation. The Louvre's online collection for the Victory Stele of Naram Sin. Thank you for listening to Turning Points in History. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. Comment with your suggestions of historical topics you would like us to include in future episodes.